This meeting of the Committee for Port Phillip City Council. Welcome to my fellow councillors, officers, and thank you to the members of the gallery who are here in person and watching online. It is right and appropriate that we at the City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledge the Yilukit Woolen clan of the Boonwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land on which we meet today. My name is Marcus Pearl, Councillor for Gateway Ward, and I'll be your chair for this meeting. It's a privilege to welcome the members of the gallery here this evening. I'd like to introduce you to our councillors. To my right, from Canal Ward, we have Councillor Baxter, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Gross. From Gateway Ward, we have Councillor Simic and Councillor Voss. And from Lake Ward, we have Councillors Bond, Brand and Copsey. Our senior officers here this evening are George Borg and Mrs D'Alessandro and Mr Gutteridge. Council's Local Law Number 2 determines how this meeting will be conducted, including the agenda. However, there are a few sections worth highlighting. Firstly, Item 4 provides the opportunity for public question time. During public question time, members of the public can ask specific questions on planning matters other than those relating to topics on the agenda for tonight. There is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions and or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda. This will be done prior to the committee considering the item itself in terms of when we vote. We encourage members of the gallery to ask questions or speak to a report. Simply complete the blue form that is available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to Murray or another staff member. This committee can only address questions and deal with items within its delegation, that is, planning matters. The decisions of this committee are obviously final. In the public interest and in the spirit of transparency, this meeting is being live streamed on our website and our Facebook page. A recording of this meeting will be available in a few days' time on the council website and YouTube channel. You can find that at webcast.portphillip.vic.gov.au. The cameras will film and record the councillors at this meeting and Mr Borg. We'll do our best not to film or record images of a member of the gallery. If a member of the gallery does speak to a question or makes a comment about an agenda, your voice will be heard, and it obviously will be heard on live stream and recorded, but it's unlikely that you'll appear on the film, obviously, that's being live streamed or recorded. We don't allow this meeting to be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the chair. In the unlikely event of emergency or evacuation, please follow the instructions from the Chief Warden. And could I also ask you to turn your phones to silent? Let's move to item 1. There's no apologies, so we'll move to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any questions regarding the minutes of our previous meeting? I'm happy to move those minutes. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Simic. All those in favour? That's carried. Item number 3, do councillors wish to declare any conflicts of interests? There being none, I'll move to item number 4, which is public question time. We have a couple of members wishing to speak this evening. Jeanette, you're up first. Would you please come up to the microphone? You just have to hit the button as you approach the chair, and once the red light's on, feel free to ask your question.
Good evening, everyone. Jeanette Gleeson, and I live in St Kilda. Do you keep pressing the button, or you just? All right. Now, this is regarding the proposed development at 276 to 290 St Kilda Road, St Kilda, which is going to VCAT on Monday. So there'll be 3 days of a compulsory hearing: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm speaking on behalf of the neighbours. And the 4 streets involved are St Kilda Road, Inkerman Street, Bath Street and Farmer Street. That makes a rectangle. So we've got those 4 streets that will be impacted by this proposed development in a block which has some heritage buildings and nothing at the moment over 3 stories. So I'm glad that the council is on board and has actually rejected it, so that's good. And I've spoken to a couple of people, Kathleen Pound and Matt Spencer. Kathleen Pound will be at the VCAT hearing on Monday for the 3 days, and you have a legal representative as well, which I think her name is Romy. The reason I'm coming tonight, I'd like to thank you for rejecting this overdevelopment, which is supposedly, originally it was 72 apartments on this block, and after Mark 3 of going back, they've come down to 67 apartments. Now, at the back of my house, this is where the proposed development is. I'd like to hand out 2 things so that you can have a look at them. I've got 10 copies of a picture of Bath Street with a red outline showing what the impact would be on Bath Street, and the black and white photos from my house, what you can see now, including the 2 gum trees I'd like to discuss tonight, and at present what you would see. I might just, yep, thank you. So I'll just wait until you've got those 2 copies. Now, while you're getting the 2 copies, I'd like to also read out a petition that I put, and it was concerning the neighbours and this proposed development. And I'd like to just read it out, and it has signatures on it. I think there's also, you've got the original copy of it. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, at least 10 signatures on this petition. There's also an online petition which I believe at the moment has over 300 people who have commented that they disagree with the proposal. There have also been posters put up at tram stops and different places. So we are trying to make people aware of it. So I'll read out the petition. It says, "We, the residents of adjoining streets," is that too close? Sorry. "Are put under duress and strongly oppose the proposal because it is a complete overdevelopment of the above site. It is a threat to an otherwise quiet and attractive streets with mostly single-fronted Victorian houses, heritage-listed terraces on the corner of Inkerman Street and Bath Street, at least 1 heritage-listed shop on St Kilda Road, and nothing over 3 stories in the whole block. And I've been advised today that the hotel on the corner is a heritage building as well, and on the opposite side, what used to be the St Kilda Post Office is also a heritage building. So in this block at present, with the heritage buildings, we have single-fronted Victorians mostly, there are other ones, but the amenity of the area is quite heritage looking, and this proposed development, if you have a look at the A3 sheet, you can see what the street, this is Bath Street at the moment, you can see what the buildings look like. Everyone's tried to maintain that look. Even if they've had an extension, they've tried to uphold the amenity of the area and the Victorian nature of it. I do have a photo of what the building that's proposed will look like, but it's basically a big block mass which is totally out of character with any of the heritage buildings as well as the Victorian-looking ones. Would you like me to hold up a quick picture?
We're at 3 minutes now, so I guess we need to get a specific question.
Okay, I'd like to get to the point, which is, behind my house we have 2 beautiful spotted gums. The 2 gum trees, I've taken some photos of them, but if you have a look at where that red line is, that's one of them. Now these 2 trees, I would like to have them maintained, and I wasn't sure before tonight because someone told me that Council had given permission for these 2 trees to be pulled out, but
that's okay. We can cover off. So the trees. Is there anything else you'd like to ask about?
The main thing is if the trees could be maintained, because there'd be a natural screen and they're in perfect order, and they've got native birds and bats in there. They're endangered, and if these trees could be put down as significant trees, that they could be maintained and that the proposed developers wouldn't take them out.
Okay. Sorry, go for it, Councillor Gross.
So these trees are on the properties behind yours?
They are, and one is extremely close to the fence. They've put in a black wrought iron fence, and one of them is only like 30 centimetres from the fence. You can see on that photo with the forward, just the bottom corner, that's showing the fence there and the tree. It's less than 30 centimetres from the fence, which really shouldn't impact the development, I believe, because they've got the laneway and it doesn't affect anything like the roots haven't affected anything.
All right, I'll hand to Mr Borg to get the ball rolling. Perhaps also a bit of an update on the permit.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chairman.
It's not working, George.
Done it. Through you, Mr Chairman. Yes, the application, going back to the application has been refused, so we would be certainly arguing and submitting that the application does not go ahead, and so the trees will remain. If the tribunal is of a mind to support the application, that will mean the removal of those trees. However, they will need to go through a local law permit, and that will be subject to whether the trees are significant or not. We haven't been able to get on site to do a measurement, but usually the measurement is a 1.5 metre circumference of the tree trunk, sitting at about 1 metre above the ground. So we haven't been able to do that. The arborists have indicated that they believe they are significant, and they would need a local law permit to have them removed. So there's 2 steps in that process. However, we are confident that we're going to put up a very good case at VCAT on Monday.
Follow-up question from Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask, are you submitting the petition tonight, or what is the situation with your petition?
Just wanted to make the council aware of it because I know that you have rejected the development, so that's good. I might just take that with me to VCAT and show that, because I've got half an hour to speak either Monday, Tuesday. So, yeah.
Okay, so we're not asking for the petition to be tabled tonight. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Through you, Mr Chairman, can I also say that in discussion with Ms Gleeson that a lot of the people on that petition are already parties to the hearing. So, and because the decision's been made, objections cannot now be received. So it's a matter that we'll take up a VCAT, and I understand that the objectors are putting a very strong case in relation to the trees and the overall development.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Christine Walker. Just the microphone's already on. If you just restate your name and just your suburb, please.
Christine Walker, Balaclava. So I can go on for 3 minutes, can I? Well, I've got a whole lot of
3
questions.
Minutes.
Pardon?
3
can
minutes.
I only ask one question, or can I ask multiple?
You can bundle them up.
Okay. Well, the first question that I have to ask is, can the council demonstrate it has used an exhaustive process to consider the best possible use of the land 46 to 58 Marlborough Street, which it proposes to severely limit the public use of? So that's my first question. My second question is that we have been advised by, in discussions by Council, and I mean residents and local traders, that there's a view that the property prices in the area will be diminished as a result of this development. We've also been told that it's not because of the nature of the people that will be living there, and accept that as said. My question, therefore, is why is it that your representatives believe that property prices in this area will be diminished? And why is it that Council's choosing to make decisions that, in fact, obviously will diminish the area and the city of Port Phillip? Good tip from my preceding speaker. The number of large trees in the car park, we'd like to know whether they're significant and if they'll be preserved in this development. There's considerable bird life in those trees, and what will be done to ensure that that continues. The other issue is, and I will take some photos and bring it to the next meeting, is to demonstrate the clear view of wide open space and beautiful outlook from the station that some 2,000 people use on a daily basis. So when you stand there, you can see out right through trees, and it's a beautiful open space. These ambient spaces are fewer and fewer, and are very important for the well-being of the community. So if you could, I'll just bring that and ask a question about it next time, I guess. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, Ms Walker. We appreciate it. I'm going to take those on notice, because under the committee rules of which this committee meets, it can only discuss items of planning. So the four questions you've asked there, I respect the fact you've come in and asked the questions, and what I'll ask to do is ask an officer to fill them up. I can try and get these answered in a planning context, but I don't think they'll satisfy the magnitude of the answers you're looking through and the questions you're asking. So we respect that you've come and asked the questions. We'll take them on notice, and I'll ask an officer to follow up each one of the 4 points that you've listed here. But I can't get them. It would set a strange precedent if I allowed those questions to be answered by the planning staff.
Okay,
But thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. Any more public questions? I think we're done. We'll move now from item 4 to item 5, which is councillor question time. Councillors, do you have any questions? We shall move to item 6, which is presentations of reports. Item 6.1. Item 6.1 is 9 to 11 Palmerston, Crescent, South Melbourne. We'll go straight to questions. David McGowan, if you could just restate your name and the suburb in which you live.
David McGowan. I live in St Kilda Road, Melbourne. Thank you, Chairman and Councillors, for the opportunity to speak to you tonight briefly on the proposed development at 9 to 11 Palmerston Crescent. I wanted to say that I fully support the officer recommendation to Council that it should refuse to issue a permit for this development. The applicant has made no attempt to comply with the provisions of the planning scheme regarding setbacks, parking or amenity, nor has the applicant respected the equitable development rights of the adjoining properties. The officer report highlights numerous deficiencies in the development proposal, and accordingly there is no need for me to detail them further. Critically, the applicant has completely ignored the constraints of the narrow laneway. There are 5 properties in all that use this laneway for different purposes: cars, people, access. And the impact that this proposal would have on all existing and future users has been ignored by the applicant. In order to ensure resident amenity, there needs to be a minimum of 9 metres between buildings containing habitable room windows across a laneway. Boundary setbacks are the key to achieving this, and as a byproduct would provide an opportunity for a widened laneway in similar fashion to what has been achieved in part through development applications at Little Bank Street. I'm a participant in a community group interested in ensuring that development in sub-precinct 2, in which this development falls, respects the objectives and intent of the DDO 26 and the C107 planning scheme. As highlighted in the report before you, there are major deficiencies with this proposal, and I strongly support the officer recommendation to reject this proposal and oppose the application at VCAT, where I will also be an opposing objector. Thank you.
We greatly appreciate you coming in. No one else has requested to speak on this item, Councillor, so I'll open it up to you if you've got any queries of the officers. Councillor Brand.
I'm just trying to locate the list of reasons, but the loading bay. What was the problem with the? Is there a problem with the loading bay in this particular building?
Mrs. D'Alessandro.
I just got a plan here that says that it has one, so I'm just not quite sure.
So on, through you, Mr. Chair, on page 9 we have 11 grounds of refusal, and this development does provide an on-site loading bay that's accessible from the laneway.
Okay, so that's one. Page 9, sorry.
Got a follow-up? Councillor Brand?
No, I've not. No, not quick-witted enough. Sorry.
Do you want more time to consider, or? No. Councillor Copsey?
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Let's do... no. Councillor Voss, you got a question? Would someone like to move for me? Councillor Bond, would someone like to second that motion? The officer's recommendation we're talking about. Councillor Voss. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the officer's recommendation?
It's just great to see an application in this area come to us where I think it's pretty much agreed by residents and officers that they've made the right decision in rejecting this proposal. So hopefully we get a very good outcome from VCAT when it goes to VCAT later.
Thanks, Councillor Bond. Councillor Voss.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Bond and certainly with what Mr McGowan said and the numerous people that have sent us emails on this, that this is the right decision to reject this application. It doesn't conform to any of the things that we want to see for this precinct, so I fully endorse the officer's recommendation.
Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Brandt.
I just want to mildly disagree with Councillor Voss to say that it doesn't fulfil any of the expectations of this council. I think there are two that it does. I think that it's actually quite, in terms of a building as a sort of a sculptural sort of thing, I think it's actually a pretty terrific looking building. I'm not sure that it needs a podium if it is articulated in space the way it is. There are alternatives than there are alternatives to just following the formula that actually still work. I think the apartment layouts in the building are clever and generous. I think it's got things working for it that other buildings that we have rejected and other buildings which we may have found, or VCAT may have found hard to reject, a lot way inferior to this in some of those aspects. This one also has a loading bay, which is a miracle for such a small site. So, I think we've got to be careful with our words about how roundly we condemn the efforts of designing a building which I think in some ways is pretty desirable. I'll be voting against it for the other reasons, but not for all of them.
Thanks, Councillor Brand. Any further comments? Thank you, Councillor Bond and Voss, for moving and seconding that motion. I'll now put that motion to councillors. Those in favour? Those against? Motion's carried unanimously. We now move to item 6.2, which is Evelyn Street, St Kilda. There's a couple of extra ones. I'll go straight to questions from the gallery. Would Philomena Tizone please take the seat and just get you to repeat your name and suburb? Philomena, are you here? No? Okay, we'll move to the next person, which is Mr. Warren Middleton. Philomena or Warren, are you here? Yes. Welcome. Philomena, take a seat. You're straight into the hot seat. There's a button there. If you could just press it and state your full name and your suburb and ask your question or make your comment.
Hi, my name's Philomena Tissoni and I live at 34 Evelyn Street, St Kilda East. My comment is in relation to the 36 Evelyn Street, St Kilda East application. I'll start by saying I note that the applicant has made changes since the original version and I have met with them and acknowledged those changes, but there's three things that I'd like to say. One is, whilst I recognise that we're not in with a heritage overlay, Inkerman Street and Gordon Street have those heritage overlays, we're right on the cusp. And this is the first house that you see when you leave the heritage overlay. So therefore I would expect it to be more sympathetic to the heritage overlay than what it currently is. Secondly, I would say that the majority of houses, actually all of the houses in our street, have a shallow frontage. And therefore, with a second story, I would expect it to be further set back than what this one is. It's only about a metre setback. I would expect it to be further set back. The third thing I would say is that 90% of the houses in our street are period homes. Of that, almost 50% are semi-detached. Oh, there's my house. As our houses are. Of those period semi-detached, none of them have two-storey, one-storey, modern period. So I feel that it just sets a bad precedent for the street. Any questions?
Thanks for coming in. Please feel free to take a seat. Warren, please feel free to take a seat. Just state your full name and your suburb if you could.
Hey, Warren Middleton, St Kilda East. So I live on Inkerman Street. So our property is, the proposed development is actually on our back fence line. So practically I'm here in support of Phil, and I really do actually agree with everything she says regarding Evelyn Street. My property is a heritage overlay property. I have done some renovations to the property in the last couple of years. But obviously the proposed development, as Phil has mentioned, is sort of out of character with the street, particularly. Obviously, it sort of increases or blocks our view, at the back of our property, which, I understand it's, the area is very much getting developed all the time. It will block the view, and it's not a very nice looking design, to be fair. But more so, it does take away from the streetscape, and it does directly affect Phil and her property per se. The development around the area is obviously in full swing, as we all know, and it just at some point, we feel that it needs to sort of slow down a little bit. It does seem like every little parcel of land is being developed above what it should be. Really, there's a fair amount of congestion, as we all know. And yeah, we'd just like to think, hopefully the council will make the right decision, to see that we can all, everyone that lives in the area has a nice sort of standard of living and is not overly affected by development. That's probably about it, really, I think.
Thanks so much.
No,
we appreciate it. Trevor Ludeman, please. Feel free to take a seat. The mic's already on. If you just repeat your name and the suburb you live in.
Trevor Ludeman, I'm the planning consultant who's representing the applicant today. So we agree with the officer's recommendation in terms of its approval. What we would say is that the design has been modified a number of different times to appease both the urban designer, heritage advisor, etc., and the planning officers. It's gone from a more contemporary design, a more modern approach, to one of a more, what you would call, standard residential design with the ubiquitous hip-to-tiled roof form, which now fronts the extension. It sits over the existing building envelope. So in terms of its second story, it sits over the existing ground floor envelope, so it's not a big extension from that point of view. Its interface to the property to the south, which is in the heritage overlay, is to an existing flat-roofed carport. It maintains, because it's over the building envelope, it maintains the street setback anyway. So in terms of its interface to the street, the front yard, front garden area is not impacted at all. So what we say is that at the end of the day, it's a very considered approach, a very modest approach, even though it's a second story or a first floor over. And we agree with the officer's recommendation.
Thanks for that. There was a late form that came in also. It's usually protocol that the applicant would speak last, but Cynthia Carina, if you were here, please feel free to take the chair. Mr. Ludeman, if you wish to have a quick right of reply based on what's said here, I'll be happy to allow that.
Hi, thanks for...
if you just state your name and the suburb you live in.
Sorry, Cynthia Carina, St Kilda East.
Perfect. Welcome.
Thank you. Just a point, I don't think that it's a modest approach, that particular design. I actually find it quite overwhelming when I first saw it. Admittedly, it was in white and it's not clear what colour it is now. So it's a bit sort of in your face, for want of a better word. So I really disagree. It's not a modest approach. The second floor, for me, probably needs to be set back more if it indeed has to be a second floor. I think it's out of character with the neighbourhood. I mean, it's a sort of like a duplex, and the roof line in all the houses when you walk across, walk down the street in the neighbourhood, all the duplexes have got the same roof line. None of them really have that weird wobbly up one, down one type of design. It seems like they're trying to squeeze a McMansion in half a block. And that's why, if they are going to do that, I'd like to see the second floor set further back so it's not so overwhelming. And so it at least tries to make an effort to be in character with the neighbourhood. I suppose the idea in design in these houses is not to follow bad precedent that already exists, but to follow and create good precedent. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Did you want to say anything else, or I'm happy to give you a right of reply for a very quick one if possible, though?
Very quick one, Mr Chairman. You'll see in the officer's report that they describe the neighbourhood character as being eclectic, very St Kilda in terms of its mix of architectural styles right throughout the street. And you can see that for when you go up and down Evelyn Street. So it's not going to be one of those ones that's going to stick out like the proverbial. It's going to be part of the current mix of different building styles in Evelyn Street.
All right, thank you, Mr Ludeman. I appreciate that. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford, go ahead.
I do have a whole series, if I may. Firstly, many of the objectors have mentioned preferring a further setback. Could you clarify for me whether it does meet, the standards required in terms of setback, and also answer, is there a specific character of the street for those first two, if you may?
For you, Mr Chair, the character of the street is mixed, and it's mixed with regards to scale, mostly 1 and 2 storey buildings, and it's mixed as regards to period and architectural style. So it ranges from Victorian cottages through Federation, bungalow, interwar, and some contemporary, and that includes some additions to some of those different periods of dwellings. As regards, I'm sorry, the first part of your question has just gone out of my head. I'm sorry.
The setback.
The setbacks, yes.
Yeah, it doesn't meet the code.
The council policy for setbacks for up-level additions for heritage areas is to mass those sitting within a sight line, generally within 10-degree line taken from the front gutter. There is some variance possible in that policy for mixed streetscapes and streetscapes where there's limited view lines and so forth, including narrow streets or streets where sites where there's a taller building adjacent. But this site is not in a heritage overlay, and in that circumstance, there is that opportunity to build up to the front wall.
Councillor Crawford, continue.
If I may have some follow-up questions. Whether we like it or not, we live in the inner city, which is developing very fast, and the price of land is high. And given that there isn't heritage overlay, is it likely that blocks like this will see, we're seeing it across the municipality where second stories are added to areas that don't have heritage? This is a common practice, I guess, is what I'm asking, across the municipality at the moment.
For you, Mr Chair. Short answer is yes. We're seeing existing dwellings along streets nearby being renovated, extended, or even demolished and replaced with new, typically multi-level dwellings.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Gross, and then Councillor Brand.
Mr Guttridge, I just want to return to the issue of the setback. So in the recommendation, the condition 1A, could you explain to me how that would work, that condition?
Mr Guthrie, that one's for you.
For you, Mr Chair. The condition 1A seeks the deletion of the carport, a proposed flat roof carport in the front setback. One of the characteristics of Evelyn Street is consistent front yards, albeit some of them are relatively small in the realm of 2 or 3 metres or so, but others larger, of around about the 5 metre mark, and there's varying degrees of landscaping in those front yards. There's only 2 properties in the links of the street which currently have any structure between the front fence and the front wall of the dwelling. This property is one of them, which has a pergola structure which has acquired at some stage some clear roofing to become a sort of a carport, and there is a very simple flat roof carport about 2 doors down diagonally across the road. Officers' assessment is that open characteristic of the front yards, front setbacks, is something which is dominant and should be preserved.
Thanks, Mr. Gutteridge. Councillor Gross, would you like to follow up? Hit it again.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up with what's the nature of the setback on that first story addition? Is it does it match the other setbacks in the street, or is it closer to the front fence?
Mr. Gutteridge.
Through you, Mr. Chair, in relation to the semi-detached pair which we're dealing with here, the upper level addition follows the footprint of the existing ground floor. That is, it comes right up to the front wall, it matches the side wall and the rear boundary. So it's essentially a replication of the ground level footprint. Along the street, there's a variety of setbacks from upper level additions, but it includes other 2-storey buildings which are close to the street.
Thank you. Councillor Brandt, your question?
Thank you. Mr. Guttridge, is there anything in our planning scheme that would allow and interpret, or could be interpreted as saying that duplexes should be kept mirror image, sort of identical with each other? Anything that would protect, sort of changing one from a mirror image pair into a completely different thing?
Mr. Gutteridge.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, there is not. It's not an unusual part of our housing stock, the duplex pair or even terrace type development, and we see and have approved quite a number of applications where only one half of that pair has sought to redevelop, and that includes in and outside of heritage overlay areas.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
I just want to address one of the other issues raised by the objectors. We are unable to make any decision on the rate of development happening in the area. That is not something that we consider under the planning scheme. I just want to clarify that. Even if there's lots of things happening around it, that is not something we can take into consideration.
For you, Mr. Chair, the Planning Environment Act stipulates that Council must consider all applications that are lodged with it. So we do not have any power to say no. If someone turns up at the counter and lodges an application, we must consider it. We must make a determination on it.
Thank you for that. Any further questions, councillors? You've got an officer's recommendation in front of your item 6.2. Would anyone like to move that or something else? Councillor Copsey to move and Councillor Bond to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the item? Councillor Bond, would you wish to speak to the item? Councillors, anybody else would like to speak to this item? Councillor Brand, go ahead.
I'm going to vote with the officer's recommendation, but with a degree of regret. There's not very much I like about this application either, but we're in a situation where we have very few controls. It's not in a heritage area. The neighbourhood character provisions are very blunt and don't sharpen to rule out something like this. It's of a reasonable height, being 2 storeys. It's of a reasonable footprint, being the same as the house before. If it's a bit visually bulkier than some of the other houses next door, it actually, well, the house beside it on Inkerman Street, actually, it has a setback of 0 on Evelyn Street, so there's a sort of a sense of a shoulder. A transition there. There's just nothing to stop this. I personally really regret the addition of the terracotta roof onto a modern, what seemed to be a modern sort of design, which has turned it into a bit of a dog's breakfast, but I don't think it's improved it. But this is the situation we're in, and I think that we have to accept this as within the goalposts of what the planning scheme can exclude, and we can't exclude this.
Thanks, Councillor Brand. Any other speakers? Councillor Baxter, go ahead, and then Councillor Gross.
Look, oh wow, okay. I just wanted to sort of echo Councillor Brand's points in that I don't have to actually like an application to have to vote for it. My job as a councillor is to, all of our jobs as councillors is to interpret and implement the planning scheme in our decisions. While I agree that this does look like it's a very strange outcome to come here, half of a duplex and that sort of thing, it's certainly, I can't see any reason, any parts of the planning scheme that would actually lead me to say I can vote against this in an application of the planning scheme. So what I would say is, for those people that are concerned about the rate of development, that's not something that council deals with on a case-by-case basis of going, we'll like this application, we don't like this application. But what it is our job to do is to continually review the planning scheme and see what is appropriate rules for certain areas, and that's something that I can make a promise on behalf of all of us that we'll continue to look at and make sure that we're doing our best within all the constraints that local councillors have to make those rules as level a playing field for ordinary people as possible.
Thanks, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Gross.
Councillors, I just wanted to put on the record that I do find this a really disappointing outcome. It may be a lawful outcome, but it is disappointing, particularly from the elevations from the side are really uninspired. It's good to see the conditions of the offices, which I applaud, that got rid of the carport, which I think intruded into an important setback. And I really welcome Councillor Brand's question about what can we do with a duplex that's got a private property right to develop, and then it just breaks up the whole architectural rationale of the duplex, which is the mirror image, in a very land-efficient way. Duplexes are a pretty important part of this part of the municipality, and I always really get upset when I see them being disrupted in this way. That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Councillor Gross. Would any other councillors like to speak? Would the mover like to close? Okay, councillors, item 6.2, and now put that motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? Carried unanimously. We'll move now to item 6.3, which was Thistlethwaite Street and City Road, South Melbourne. Okay, just the one speaker this evening, councillors, and that is the applicant themselves, Alice Malloy. If you could just state your name and the suburb, that'd be great, and just hit the button. There you go.
Thanks, councillors and chair. My name's Alice Maloney. I'm from Ratio Consultants and I'm the planning consultant in relation to this application. We have lodged amended plans as a result of detailed design. We've had some feedback from councils, consultants and referral authorities, and they have all been captured as Condition 1 requirements, which we are happy to adopt. So I'll just keep it short. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions on this item for officers? Okay, there being none, I'm happy to get a mover on the officer's recommendation or something, an alternative to that. Councillor Simic, Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak? That's fine, no problem. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak as a seconder?
I just want to put on the record that I'd like to thank and congratulate the officers for these extensive, exhaustive and voluminous conditions. So it's the other thing I want to say is I went to Thistlethwaite Street about 5 years ago when at one stage it thought there was going to be 30 stories and 50 stories, 60 stories, whatever, in Thistlethwaite Street. And, you know, I always have to remind myself that Thistlethwaite Street, completely industrial, but it's really adjacent to very sensitive areas like parts of the residential areas of Port Melbourne, which are 1 and 2 stories. So even though if you look at Thistlethwaite Street on its own, it's ripe for redevelopment, industrial that can really fulfil all the conditions of what should be an area in transition. I accept that. But we always have to be really mindful of the proximity of those sensitive port suburbs. And I think this won't be too intrusive, and it definitely, I'm happy to support it. But I do make this caveat about the area.
Thanks, Councillor Gross. Any other councillors? Councillor Brand, go ahead.
The lack of 3D images in the report here makes it hard to judge what this building really looks like. It doesn't strike me as being an architectural masterpiece, but I've got to say it's interesting that we have a developer and an architect who are actually able to do a different typology from the tower and podium. This is a sort of a double courtyard development. It's got a courtyard in the middle, a communal courtyard rather than a tower. And I think that that's interesting that we're actually, I think it might be the first one that I've seen in the Fisherman's Bend area that is actually, this is a double courtyard, it's like a figure of 8 somehow, which is quite nice. I'm really pleased that somebody is actually trying something different that we can look at. I'd be interested to know what the density of the population on this block would be, and how tall a tower would have to be to achieve the same population as this one. And I think this one in many ways might be a better model, and so I'm happy to be supporting it.
Thanks, Councillor Brand. Anybody else wish to speak to the item? Move now to the mover if he wishes to speak, which he does not. I'll put that motion to councillors. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried unanimously. Thanks, councillors. We'll move now to item 6.4, which is Bank Street, South Melbourne. I'll go straight to questions from the gallery. Mr. or Mrs. Kilikowski. Sorry, what was that? Order? You should call, of course you can. I'll call you back. Was it Donna who was next? You want to go later as well? Brian, Jeff, who wants to go first? Jeffrey? Jeffrey, come on down. If you just say your full name and the suburb in which you reside, that'd be great.
My name's Jeffrey John Dowdell, and I live in South Melbourne. So, okay. Councillors, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. My name's Jeff Dowdell. I'm speaking on behalf of the objectors in this development, including neighbours Mark Freeman, Anne Flanagan at number 133 Bank Street, who can't be here tonight, Bob and Sally Everett of 1A and Wilson Street, Auntie will, of 141 Bank Street will speak for David and Sandra Sofa of 1 Wilson Street, who also cannot make it to present their statement tonight, so he'll present it on their behalf. Have a look at slide 2. We're a close community in the area there, in this part of Emerald Hill, and are concerned about the impact of this proposed development on our very historic neighbourhood. Impact on the quality of life of our neighbours impacts all of us, and so we stand united in our objections to the unreasonable and unfair impact this development will have if it were allowed to pass. As a neighbourhood, we are not opposed to development of the Old Town Hall Hotel, but we are opposed to its overdevelopment. We had to prosecute this argument, and the VCAT member, Rebecca Naylor, did find in our favour and refused the permit. Fast forward to today, and the developer has submitted a proposal that has stepped the development in from the front and very slightly at the back. They would argue that they have addressed the VCAT member's decision, but we feel they have not captured the essence of her findings, and we see this as very important. The member had a number of reasons to refuse the permit as an inappropriate design response. She says at 74, the heritage significance and amenity of the properties to the rear should be balanced to achieve an acceptable outcome. I cannot say what an acceptable outcome should be, as both considerations need to be analysed together. This is a design challenge for the permit applicant. The developer has not looked at the full context of what Member Naylor was saying. At clause 71, she explains, the standards are an important consideration, but they are not the end of the relevant amenity considerations. Sometimes amenity impacts are of a more general nature. For example, visual bulk / building bulk. Just because clause 55 standards are met in regard to the length of the walls on boundaries and wall heights and setbacks does not mean that the visual bulk impacts have been acceptably dealt with. This is an amenity impact of a more general nature that cannot and should not be distilled into individual components. The proximity of the proposed 4-storey building to those 2 existing dwellings is creating a visual bulk and shadow impact of which the later is thereby impacting upon the amount of sunlight received in the ground and first floor habitable rooms.
Now, we're just almost at 3 minutes, so I'm just conscious that you've got some slides. So
Okay.
I don't want to put you under pressure. You're doing just fine. But do you want to move forward to a couple of other slides and make a few more points in the next 30 seconds or a minute?
Okay, I'll just go forward a little bit.
That's fine.
The applicant has taken a narrow view here, and the only way to measure the impact is to stand on the first floor balcony of 1 and 1A Wilson and see if you can see the 3rd and 4th storeys. So what the proposal is a massive wall that is taller than their entire home. We don't think this is what Member Naylor had in mind when she was talking about the general nature of the visual bulk impact. That's it for me.
Thanks so much for doing that. And just a note also, thank you for sending we got the slides beforehand, so the councillors have had to have a look at it beforehand. So thank you for doing that.
Yep.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Who'd like to go next? No problem at all. If you just come down and state your name and the suburb in which you live, you just have to hit the button as well.
Kilda from South Melbourne. I'd like to jump onto slide the next. Thank you. So I've been asked to read out a statement from David and Sandra Soper, the residents at 1 Wilson Street. We're very concerned about the impact of the proposed development of 135 to 137 Bank Street on our lives at 1 Wilson Street. Our property has a northerly aspect, our family living area and bedrooms face to the north. The development as proposed would mean we will be closed in by a massive wall, higher than our 3rd-storey ceiling at its 2nd level. The wall is made even higher still by placing planter boxes at the top. The right-of-way outside our front door is only narrow, but it is our streetscape. The proposed development is set back from Bank Street so as to preserve the street view on Bank Street. We have not been afforded the same consideration. Instead, the development is amassed at the rear. We cannot get away from the imposing bulk. The development should be set back so we are not walled in. At a minimum, adhering to the B17 setback standard, stepping back the development from the second storey by at least a metre would make a difference. Perhaps alternative screening may be introduced. Creating more bulk with a wide and high planter box does nothing to relieve the feeling of being closed in. Third and fourth storeys seem out of step with this area, but these at least have been recessed. Why not the second storey? Why should we instead have a massive wall as our outlook? We're also extremely concerned about traffic movement and noise as vehicles access the proposed garage from the right-of-way. We have a young family and we are regularly in the right-of-way on foot. There is no footpath here to get to safety. We have seen nothing to assure us that there is adequate room for vehicles to access the proposed garage safely and within minimal movements. The inaccuracies in measurements of the right-of-way leave us without confidence. We cannot see a viable solution here with what has been proposed. So I'd just like to add to the statement from 1 Wilson Street. As Jeff previously read out, the VCAT member was very concerned about the visual bulk impact of the proposed development, as well as the reduction or the reduced access to daylight on the ground and the first floors. These are exactly the same concerns as David and Sandra share still. The current development proposal is largely the same as that which was rejected by VCAT with respect to the first and second floors at the rear boundary. The only difference is a setback of 1 metre, just 1 metre. With reference to Res Code standard for the rear setbacks, B17, the proposed development does not comply with the setback provisions as is shown on the slide. Scaling off the developer's plans compliance with B17 would only require the second floor rear wall to be moved by approximately 1 metre, not much of an ask. As the member said, simple adherence to codes does not mean amenity impact is avoided, but as a minimum, we ask that any development at 135 to 137 Bank Street should be made to adhere to B17 to minimise the visual bulk and the reduction in access to daylight for the residents of 1 and 1A Wilson Street. Thank you.
Terrific. Councillor Gross, would you like to ask a question of the Speaker?
No, I wanted to ask a question. I know it's out
Can
of
it wait?
order. Can I just foreshadow that I want some clarity on what the conditions do about that setback? So when it comes to our turn, if you can please address that, that'd be great.
We'll do it in one go, if that's all right. Sorry, pardon me. Feel free to take a seat. Donna, would you like to go next? Brian. Who's chairing this meeting anyway? Take a seat, hit the button, and if you'd say your full name and your suburb, please.
Sorry, you haven't...
Is that right? Okay. How's that? Good? My name's Brian Grieve. I live in Wilson Street, South Melbourne, obviously. My main objections, apart from agreeing with the other people, is the amount of traffic in Wilson Street. Now, there are 12 residences in Wilson Street. 11 of them have garages. And Wilson Street has 15 other properties which utilise Wilson Street for access to their car parks. There's 4 on Palmer Street, 5 on Bank Street, 4 on Park Street and 2 on Moray Street. That comes to about 28 cars use Wilson Street. Now, this development wants another 14 cars added to that. It's too many, particularly as I guess the use of their car lift is to maximise space underground for so they can have a set number of units. Okay, well, all of these problems can be solved by access to Bank Street from this new development. Bank Street is very much underutilised since Moray Street Crossroad was disbanded, you might say. There's hardly any traffic using Bank Street. Access from Bank Street will be very easy because the traffic in turning from Moray Street to Bank Street has a sharp left-hand turn, so they're only going to go 15, 20 k's an hour. And the visual access from Bank Street is good for traffic in all directions. I think that Council says they're very proud of their bluestone lanes. Well, this bluestone lane at present is little more than an access lane for various properties. Okay, that's all I have to say on that.
Thanks so much. And Andy or Donna? No problem. If you could take a seat and just state your name. The mic's already on, so just state your name and suburb, please.
Okay, thanks, Mr Chairman. My name's Donna Tebow. I'm from Bank Street, South Melbourne, 141. Further to what Brian spoke about just now, the right-of-way at the back of the property has actually not been surveyed by the developer. The measurements have been different on various plans and have been, if anything, always underestimated if you get your tape measure out there. And it is actually inconsistent, the measurement at one end of it compared to the other, and it varies, as it often does in these old cobblestone streets. We just don't have confidence, really, in terms of the traffic movements. In the last week, we received a traffic engineering report on the 20th of July, then another one on the 23rd. The swept paths showed no measurement and only one approach from one direction on Wilson Street. The latest traffic report says the corner splay area of Design 1 standard does not apply because there is no footpath. And an earlier report said as there is no footpath provided and the likelihood of pedestrians is effectively nil, this standard does not apply. But as you heard from Brian, there's an awful lot of foot traffic down Wilson Street, and actually more than car traffic. So we do think it is dangerous. As a neighbourhood, we just don't have any confidence in the swept paths, and we think that it's not enough just to merely say that it should be a condition for them to provide, different swept path analysis and to, also do the survey. We would like to see that it is actually safe and it is safe for all of us in that vicinity. So what we're looking for from you, we're looking for your help, really. We've been fighting this for some time now at significant cost. We know that under Amendment VC 110 of March 2017, that this whole development really would be limited to 2 stories. VC 110 was in draft, of course, when the developers first put their first application forward. Nonetheless, we understand that the transitional provisions apply in this case. But the bottom line has been that this has been an overdevelopment from the start. This is a 1 to 2 story area. The 1 and 1A Wilson Street are 3 stories but with very low ceilings, so they're only the equivalent of 2 ceilings in the current development as it stands or as it's proposed. The laneway at the back would have been for horse and dray. It's not what you typically think in terms of a laneway. It's very narrow. We can't see how Council could support a development with so many questions around pedestrian safety, traffic, sewerage, and also clearly seeing the unreasonable impact that it has on 1 and 1A Wilson Street in terms of whether their entire outlook from their home would be straight onto a large wall that's larger than their dwellings. We don't think that's reasonable. And we as a neighbourhood, we're very close, so we care about the impact on our neighbours, not only the impact on us. So we don't want to keep fighting this just on our own. We would really like the Council's support, so we would ask the support of Council's Planning Department and yourselves to support us as we go to VCAT and ensure that the development is respectful to the fabric of this part of Emerald Hill and to the quality of life of residents now and in the future.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
And I'm correct in saying Mr Andy McShannock is not here this evening to ask a question?
Not yet.
Okay, no problem. Therefore, I'll go straight to the applicant if possible, Mr Jason Black. The microphone's on, so just state your name and suburb, please.
Jason Black from Inside Planning Consultants, representing the applicant. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Council tonight. Obviously there's been a lot of work that has gone into the preparation of the Council report and working closely with both the planning officers here and management, as well as trying to work through, I guess, matters with the community as well, which some of them have been raised there tonight. I think probably just want to focus on the changes that have occurred during the process in trying to respond to some of the issues that have been made, and they're outlined in depth in section 6 of the Officers of the Council report. But firstly, to acknowledge that the reduction in apartments has gone from 11 to 6 apartments. In order to reduce the size of a building, you obviously impact on apartment sizes and things like that as well, but also have made those changes in the context of thinking about impact. And impact is measured by many things, but one of them is obviously the number of apartments requiring number of car spaces, traffic volumes, etc. So there's been a significant reduction there, and a significant reduction therefore to the overall impact that would occur from any development on the site, I would say. I guess in relation to the change of design, obviously we heard comments and it was addressed in the VCAT decision around Wilson Street, properties 1 and 1A, that are down a laneway and off to a right-of-way. So the context is quite unusual in the setting of those dwellings, but nonetheless the changes that have been made recently have seen the setbacks at all levels increase. So we're going from 0 setbacks to 1 metre minimums, and then at the upper level it's been set back from 5.3 metres to 8.8 metres. And when you look at the diagram that was up there earlier, there's significant setbacks, significant access to light, and a significant change in the proposal that's been made here in an attempt to work with the parties to come to a solution, which is, as we've heard, we've been working on for quite a period of time now. Made the comment about B17. The way B17 is applied, there's a clear statement in the decision guidelines for B17 which talks about context, and the context is whether there's side and rear lane, and therefore how you apply B17 is somewhat different, and the way we've applied it here is no different to the way it's been applied in other developments within the city of Port Phillip. Yes, there's been a journey to do that, and yes, we have tried to not have to go as far because of some of the other site constraints, but certainly now we comply with B17 in its entirety. I think it's also worth noting that the better apartment design standards came in during this application. We don't have to apply for those, again, because of transitional provisions, but we have to, again, make for a better outcome for everybody.
Now, you're just at 3 minutes. That one of the other speakers has come in, so I'm going to give you a right of reply, but ask you to wrap up on this version, if that's all right.
And I'll probably wrap up then by just highlighting that the efforts have been made in responding have been acknowledged in section 12 of the Council report, and in some cases have resulted in conditions which will result in further changes, which we're more than happy to accept.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Andy, welcome. You're welcome to speak. You're on the list, so if you'd like to take the chair, just get you to state your full name and your suburb if possible.
Was that me? Yeah. Andy McShannock.
Great.
Yes.
Suburb?
1 Palmer Street, South Melbourne.
Terrific. Go ahead.
Look, unfortunately, I've had one of those days and I've missed what the rest of my party at the back have had to say. So it's a little bit hard to elaborate on anything that they've said. I did have something prepared, which was the introduction, which has already been covered by one of my neighbours. So I guess I'd just like to reinforce what they've said. We've tried to work with these developers for a long time. We've been very much ready to negotiate and discuss at any stage. We're very happy with the VCAT process, and we're very happy with their conclusion. And I guess we're just asking the councillors again to have a look at all the plans, and we trust and we hope that the decision you make is in our favour. We're very much for the development of the site, just not overdevelopment. So I'll leave it with you. Thank you.
Thanks for that. You okay, Councillor Gross?
Pizza's on the way.
That's fine. I'm happy to offer you 30 seconds to a minute right of reply, given the order's a bit mixed up.
Yeah, very quickly, just in relation to standards, again, overshadowing requirements have all been satisfied through the changes to the design and increased setbacks, which is another performance measure. And the right-of-way, comments around the right-of-way, this project is actually increasing the right-of-way by 1 metre, and there'll be significant changes required to a current sewer vent at the moment, so it comes at a cost, but certainly acknowledge again those comments and looking to do what we can.
Thank you. Just for the record, that was Mr Jason Black representing the applicant. I'll move now to questions. Councillors, officers, would you like me to get Councillor Gross to repeat his question, or are you happy to answer it? Councillor Gross, it might be worth your while just asking it again, just so we're clear on the answer.
So it's the setback from B13.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chair. No conditions are recommended to address that non-compliance. At an officer level, we're comfortable that the objective is met, even though the standard is not technically met at the first floor in relation to the rear boundary. That's in consideration of a number of factors. First of all, there are a number of high walls at that height abutting those particular lanes. Second of all, in terms of amenity impacts, the laneway does provide some additional relief to the properties to the south, so that even though you apply the standard technically from the boundary, if you actually consider the additional 4.3-ish metres provided by the laneway, that's an additional separation. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Crawford, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, I've got one more.
I'll let him follow up.
I've already called Councillor Crawford, so we'll come straight back to you, Councillor Gross.
I'm still trying to get my head around it, so may I ask? So there was a change in setback, I want to clarify. So how much further from the back from that is it being set back at that right-of-way? Or is it from Wilson Street? Please, first question.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chair, the setback is 1 metre at the first floor. I think we're just about to bring up the slide which shows you that you can actually see on this plan the red dotted line is what was previously proposed, so you can see the additional setback that they're now proposing.
So through you, Mr Chair, and sorry to interrupt, if I take you to section 6 of the officer's report in relation to that section plan that's come up, the amended plans that we're considering at VCAT. So the original application was a 0 setback, now it's been set back 1 metre at the ground level, 0.8 to 1 metre at the first floor level, as it shows there. Then it's 2.1 metres to 5.5 metres at the second floor level, and then 5.3 metres to 8.8 metres at the top level. So the red line was what was originally, and that's the reason why officers back in January came to a view to refuse the application, and now we've got revised plans, and this is why our position has changed going into the VCAT hearing in next month.
A follow-up from you, Councillor Crawford.
Yes, so with that, so the actual ground floor has moved back a metre. Will that change the outcome? I know we're asking for swept paths diagrams. Will that setback actually allow the cars to get entry? Is that the reasoning for that setback?
So with these amended plans, we were provided with some additional swept paths, which we had our traffic engineer review. We still believe they're very tight, the movements, so that is why we have drafted the conditions in condition 1, is to require further work, and that will likely mean further changes to satisfy Council in terms of the design.
Mrs. D'Alessandro?
Sorry, and through you, Mr Chair, it will also be discussed and argued at the upcoming hearing as well, so that we're not satisfied with those swept paths, and our lawyers, through cross-examination, through the evidence supported at the tribunal, we will talk about those swept paths, and we must be satisfied. So that's why we have drafted those conditions also.
Very quickly, Councillor Crawford.
So can I ask, is this again, and I know that it's probably not legislatively allowed, that we no longer, there are some properties that should not have as many car spaces? Do you know what I mean? It's an ideal position to, as we move to the future, but that's obviously something you can't argue. But my quick follow-up question is, when a building, I'm assuming that 1A, they were built more recently on the right-of-way, facing the right-of-way, do you, and there's no footpath, do you, building in that, knowing that it's not an actual road or that, waiver any rights to, access for pedestrians and sightlines? Because facing onto a back of a building like that, there must have been, is there certain legislation that, knowing that there will become things with it, if that makes any sense whatsoever? I just wonder what rights or what legislation protects people that build opposite.
Ms Pound.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chair. It's not necessarily so explicitly said, but however, there is obviously regard to what is going on in the area. So for this design, the amended plans have actually matched the design of 1 and 1A Wilson Street with the 1 metre setback and the same height before the 2 upper floors are set back. So they have actually followed on from that precedent in a way. So you should expect a lesser amenity when you are constructed onto a laneway as opposed to onto a named street. Wilson Street is obviously named, but that little dead-end right-of-way is not named. So I think it is typical that you would expect a lesser amenity in that interface.
Thanks. Over to you, Councillor Gross. Sorry to that before.
Fine. Look, I don't want to preempt Councillor Brand, who's probably going to ask us questions around this issue, but his forensic abilities uncovered the fact that the preservation of heritage material wraps around the lane for a small period. It doesn't preserve the whole of the heritage material that's facing the side street. And I just wondered what was the rationale that you or the referee at the tribunal employed to assess what was sufficient preservation of heritage material?
Ms Pound.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chair. There was quite extensive consideration by the tribunal in its decision in relation to heritage matters, and also it was put to the tribunal by residents that it was facadism, this design, and that it should not be supported on that ground. Now, the basis of, first of all, the heritage member looked at the statement of significance that applies to this heritage precinct, and found that it's a residential heritage precinct. It's the Emerald Hill residential precinct. The statement of significance makes no mention of this commercial building or of other types of this commercial building, and in the tribunal's mind that then lessened the significance of the building to the heritage precinct. So that was the starting point that the tribunal started from. And then in terms of looking at the extent of what was retained, they agreed with Council's heritage advisor at the time, as well as the heritage advice that was put forward to them, that the front facade was the principal facade of significance, as well as the front sections of both side walls, because they are both obliquely viewable from Bank Street, so Bank Street being the principal heritage facade. And so on that basis it was kind of stated by the tribunal that retaining only a smaller section of those side walls was acceptable.
Thanks, Ms Pound.
Which is what
Councillor Voss.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I'm quite concerned about the swept path, and in particular the impact on the second speaker's place. I think it's 1 or 1A Wilson Street, or both of those properties. I'm wondering what requirements are there in the planning scheme. Their front door is right there. How far is it to, you step out the front door, are you actually stepping onto the road? Is there any requirements in the planning scheme to have a certain distance from the car as you step out the front door?
Ms Pound.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chair, no, there is no requirement for someone whether they can build a front door right onto the road. So there is no requirement under planning, under the planning scheme for that.
Councillor Voss, go ahead.
Just to follow up to that, so there's no, we don't have to take that into account at all in terms of the car potentially running them over when they walk out the door.
Sorry, my apologies. So the key concern for council is the swept path itself, and it should not go or touch at all private property. So currently one of the concerns we have is that the swept path actually shows touching of the property boundary. So that is council's concern with the vehicle, sorry, the officer concern with vehicle movements. Sorry.
Councillor Brand.
Just on the swept path thing still, the property of number 1 and number 1A, Wilson Street, it obviously there is a path area on their property that the swept path just about touches. This is looking at it in plan. I just want to confirm that we're not showing a swept path of turning into Wilson Street. If when that is applied, a swept path into Wilson, turning the corner into Wilson Street from the lane there, if that requires more area, there won't be any reliance on the private property of number 1 and number 1A to allow that to happen. I.e., if there was more area needed, it would certainly be taken off the applicant's site. If there's more setback needed to accommodate the cars, I just want to check that.
Go ahead, Ms Pound. Oh, sorry, pardon me. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I want to just check the basis of the width, the measurements of the width given here for Wilson Street, which is, I imagine, is supplied by the applicant at 4.3 metres, but the local residents say that Wilson Street actually has variable width. And I just want to know how confident we are in that and how we would handle if there was a discrepancy.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chair. My understanding of the residents' concern is that it is the width of the unnamed right-of-way that is the point of concern, not so much Wilson Street, so the issue of the unnamed laneway width has been attempted to be addressed through the condition 1, which requires a surveying of the lane, of the unnamed lane, and recognition of the fact that its width will actually vary at different points. So that needs to be reflected on the plans, which then form the basis of the swept path analysis. Condition 1D. Thank you.
The width of the right of way seems to be measured at 4.5 metres, so that would be less than the width of Wilson.
And through you, Mr Chair, it has actually been showed differently on several plans. So we measured it when we were out there the other day at a few different points, and it was sort of varied between 4.3 and 4.4. Look, at the moment, that's again part of the rationale for the conditions as well. We really need to be 100% confident that the laneway is correctly depicted on the plans and that the swept paths are based on that and not some other dimension.
Can I add as well, through you, Mr Chairman, that the expectation will be that if their swept paths don't work, that there would have to be some reduction in the applicant's building envelope to accommodate that. It can't be taken any further from the lane, and nor can it be taken from the existing properties that are there.
Councillor Baxter, Councillor Brand, follow up.
I've got a different question to ask. I was actually hoping to ask it to the applicant or the representative of the applicant, but that might be just ruled out at the moment. I don't know. It's a fiddly question about a part of the heritage design.
Let's go through the questions, see if it gets resolved. If it doesn't get resolved, I'll give it a go. But do you want to ask another question of the officers? I want to make statements later on, and I just wanted to get this one piece of the one question I would ask, and I would ask the officers, and if they can't answer it, we'll think again. Up in the just thinking about the question of the sort of of facadism, which is raised by all parties actually, but by the member at VCAT, and the way that the facade is being extended at the sides to give it a greater three-dimensional feel, and the way it is actually being extended around the side on the northeastern
facade over the neighbouring houses. There's part of the wall which steps up. It looks like it's been represented as part of the old hotel building, but it actually steps up in a way that it doesn't in existing real life. And I just want to know what solutions there would be for lowering it so that it didn't misrepresent the actual shape or didn't, in a sort of an incoherent way, suggest that the old building was a different shape or a different size or a different height than what it actually is. It's a slightly technical question, but it's important to me, given that it's a work which is employing the tactic of facadism, which I think is a very dubious way of handling a heritage building in the first place.
Ms Pound?
Thank you. Through you, Mr Chair. So I think for anyone who's unclear, page 392 of the report contains the east elevation, which shows that elevation Councillor Brand has been talking about. So potentially you could look at a condition requiring a change of materials to that part of the wall, or some type of setback. If in case of setting back, it would affect the layout of part of the second floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Pound. Councillor Crawford, go ahead.
I'm still beating the same drum. So my question is, where does our responsibility lie if we are allowing previously, and maybe we still are, for properties to be built where their front door steps into what is a laneway built for cars? Or is it, so does the responsibility for safety lie with them or with, people that will build onto properties around when it is actually a car laneway? So I'm not sure where do I make the judgment? Who has the responsibility for that? I'm really unable to make that, because it does. I mean, I know we allow infill building in lots of places, but I just don't know where the responsibility for safety lies. Is it how to make that decision?
Mrs D'Alessandro.
Through you, Mr Chair, if we look at the ground floor plan, technically the front doors of 1 and 1A actually open out onto their title boundary. So development should be contained within the title boundary, and we would always be, we would look at plans and it should be contained within the title boundary. In regards to this particular area, it is very built up. We have a laneway. We have a 2-storey townhouse development that does sit on the laneway, but it's contained within their title boundary.
Councillor Crawford.
I guess my question, though, is we're allowing building facing onto laneways where there are no footpaths. So for pedestrians, where does the safety responsibility lie, especially when there are obviously so many properties that use that area to drive through? So I'm not sure how to make the decision on the safety responsibility. We have allowed this, but should that penalise the next person in terms of safety when technically it's a road, it's not?
Mr Borg.
If I could answer that through you, Mr Chairman. The reality is that is a shared path. So it has it's a small area. It would be moved in and moved out of at a very slow speed. So it is a shared area. We have allowed a building there. The applicants have acknowledged that there is a building there, even though it is in some cases unusual circumstances, but not necessarily unusual in the inner city. So we accept that there is a building there. The applicant has acknowledged that there's a building there. We would anticipate that any movement in there would not be going at 40 or 50 kilometres an hour. It would be at a very slow pace. Right-of-ways are used throughout the inner city as a combination of passageways as well, for pedestrians also. So I think that we'd have the same sort of shared sort of facility that would be common in the inner city.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Brand, under Local Law 11A1, I'm happy for you to ask a question of the applicant if you wish. The applicant's representative, rather.
Yep.
Applicants, just get you to state your name again, if that's possible, Mr. Black.
Jason Black from Inside Planning Consultants, representing the applicant.
Councillor Brand, go ahead with your question.
Okay. Thank you. Look, I refer you to the drawing on page 387. Oh my God, I'm so far away from it.
It's on the screen.
Ah, there we are. Excellent. No, not yet. Yes. All right. That, if you can compare that one with the red and blue one, I just want to draw your attention to the side wall there, just while we're seeing it, of the lower elevation. Can we just go up? Yeah, thank you. Where you've got the name of the town hall on the side of the wall, which has been preserved. That's already there. This is the wraparound of the facade, and then it steps up, and then it goes along for the rest of the way up top. That step up is an additional step above the existing wall, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct.
The existing wall stops goes at the same height just above the town hall sign, right across.
Yes.
It's just a fussy point, but I think if we're going to do a facadist sort of thing like this, that I would think that you should actually represent the actual building. And I'm wondering, I would just like that to be observed and to be the top of that wall taken off, so it looks like the actual wall of the old building. And if you need to build a wall behind it, it needs to look like the new building is a separate building that is somehow sleeved by the old, or set back, or visually differentiated. How is that technically possible for you to do? Does it cause problems that I can't foresee?
Without being
Mr. Black, would you like to answer Councillor Brand's question?
Happy to answer Councillor Brand's question. The inclusion or the extension of that wall was something that's come out of the process. So originally the heritage advice from both our heritage advisors and Council's heritage advisors, and then the commentary in the VCAT decision, didn't necessarily put a whole lot of emphasis on this wall. However, the recognition was to then get some symmetrical outcomes effectively and make other changes to the front facade. To answer the question, I think that the suggestion of drawing the line where the wall is now and then thinking about other treatments for that minor protrusion there could be something I'm sure the project architects would be able to address.
Your mic's not on, Councillor. Would you like to foreshadow? Please take a seat.
Yes,
Mr. Black. Would you like to foreshadow something, Councillor Brand?
Yes, I'd foreshadow that I'd be making an amendment, suggesting an amendment to the officer's recommendation.
Okay, we note that. Thank you very much. Any further questions of officers, councillors? All right, councillors, you have an officer's recommendation in front of you. I'd invite one of you to move that or something alternate. Anyone want to move it? Or should defer it? All right, Councillor Bond, we have a mover. Anyone like to second the motion? Councillor Copsey. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I've just been sitting here reading the history of South Melbourne hotels. And there's a very interesting history on this one. I can recall my first time going in there would have been in the early 90s, when I think it had comedy nights or something like that a very, very long time ago. I think it's a shame that we're losing all these old pubs, but I think, as we've seen with other pubs where we've lost the facades, the Greyhound, the London, where we tried very hard, if they're going to be turned into apartments, at least try and keep the facade, and we failed to do that on those couple of occasions. In this occasion, we have, and I think it's pleasing to see that one of the old beer signs, I'm not exactly sure which sign it's going to be, is going to be maintained on one of the side walls. There's a few different variants out there. I think it's the Carlton Draft one, which was, I'm not sure what you had in mind with that condition. It'll be good to see that maintained. I know there's been some considerable changes to this. It's certainly much improved on the previous design as rejected by VCAT earlier, but this particular design, I know there's one or two things that are maybe not right, and I think the conditions will certainly address those with regard to the turning into the driveways or into the car parks, that sort of thing, and hopefully the conditions will satisfy those when we see final plans with all those conditions.
Thanks, Councillor Bond. Councillor Copsey.
I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation this evening. Thank you to the community members who've come to address Council tonight. In the circumstances, I think that providing a notice of decision or an indication of notice of decision with appropriate conditions puts officers and our solicitors in the best position to thoroughly advocate at VCAT in relation to a number of the matters that have been raised tonight and are addressed by conditions, which I've had an indication from officers this evening will be vigorously explored during the hearing. I do have a clarifying question about the foreshadowed condition, which is difficult, but because I'm speaking now, I think it's the appropriate time to ask whether there is anything...
So you're asking a clarifying question about
of
the
the
motion?
officers, yeah, but I won't get a chance to speak again.
You can ask clarifying question at any
I can ask a clarifying
time.
question, then I'll wait until
Yep.
I've heard what Councillor Brand might propose.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Councillor Brand? Yeah, that's fine, you can do that.
I, like Councillor Bond, am distressed about losing most of the character of another pub, corner pub, although we're preserving its facade. And VCAT has actually made a ruling that that actually went some way of protecting the heritage, at least the heritage imagery, the heritage facade of this building. And I think we can be grateful for that ruling, but I feel very strongly that we should have achieved a whole lot more on this one with protecting the heritage. I think the heritage of the entire facade along Wilson Street, which is actually a large piece of, I think, quite, I wouldn't quite go say spectacular, but it's a very prominent piece of Victorian wall stretching along a large portion of the street. I find it very, very hard to accept that we have said that most of that wall could actually be demolished. And I just think it's inconsistent with our planning scheme. I think it's been misunderstood because it's a side wall, it's therefore expendable. It's actually, all of our heritage is taken from a view from the street. And I understand that from the lane, you know, there are parts of a significant building that can obviously be demolished from the view from a back lane, even though that might be a pity, but this is actually from a street. This is actually a street frontage right on the street. And I don't think it should ever have got to this point. And we've ended up with a weird piece of facadism where we have just the facade of the front of it wrapped around a bit, which is an important thing to do, but none of the Victorian history of the building is actually preserved because it's being demolished. The Victorian history of the front facade has been changed by the 1930s edition, and that's part of the history. It's a great 1930s facade, perhaps. Anyway, I think that there's been a stuff up on it, and I feel very sad about it. So, but I need to say we are heading for a compulsory conference at VCAT with this, and our task is to make a tactical decision rather than a decision based on fundamental principle of what you do if we were at the start of the process. So if we instruct our officers to go back and say no, the whole side of the building needs to be preserved, VCAT has already ruled on that and said that it doesn't. Our heritage advisor has advised on that and said that we don't. We would have no chance of making that happen, I think, at VCAT, and we would not be listened to on much else. So I regrettably will probably be supporting this motion, but I do want to, after I've said all of this, which might explain why at least I want to grab back a little bit from facadism done incorrectly to make it at least facadism which is done correctly. And vote for that.
Thanks. Thanks.
Could I suggest my amendment?
Sure. Before you do, I'll just make one small correction, if I could, to ensure that we're correct. It's actually this application is going to a full hearing, as detailed in section 2.8 of the report. I just want to clear that up.
I'm sorry, I got that.
That's
confused.
fine.
But we are anyway heading for we're heading for VCAT for something which has already been decided by VCAT previously as well.
So, would you like to put an alternate?
Yes,
or an amendment?
Yep.
An alternate? Okay. Do you have words to that effect you can
I do.
supply?
If we can go to the recommendation and then go to the conditions that are recommended and go down near the bottom. Now, yeah, down to the bottom of those conditions, those lettered conditions, the next page.
At the top.
Oh. Down to condition J. Am I looking at a different lot of conditions? All right, there we are. No, we had it before. If we could just get the page before that, because I just want to know where to insert this. I want to ask the officers, should I insert it as condition J and move the last two down, or just put it right at the very end, condition L?
I would say L for you, Mr. Chair.
Pardon? We'll do L. Okay, condition L. I'm sorry to be boring you, Councillor Crawford. Wouldn't be the first time.
And she's not the only one.
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
Crack on.
That the return wall of the existing building on the northeast facade be lowered to express the existing wall height of the historic building. Oh no, I better do it quickly, slowly. That the return wall of the existing building on the northeast facade be lowered to express the existing wall height of the historic building, comma, and that any side wall,
Historic building or existing building?
well, I'll just put it saying existing twice. I'll have a look at that. And that any side wall above this height be set back and finished, set back sufficiently and set back and finished sufficiently to distinguish it. Finish isn't really a good word, but anyway. To distinguish it as new work separate from the old. Now, should I change old to existing? Should I change historic to existing?
Is that a question for the officer?
Is that unambiguous enough?
Who are you asking? Is that a clarifying question?
Yes, I'd like to ask the officers if that is unambiguous.
But perhaps,
is it understandable?
Mr. Borg, does that provide clear direction? That's okay.
All right. Or yeah. Okay. And his historic hotel building, let's say, just so we know what we're talking about.
Could you just read the last line just to confirm that you've made that change?
Hotel building, yeah. Okay. Okay. That the return wall of the existing building I said on the northeast facade, be lowered to express the existing wall height of the historic hotel building, and that any side wall above this height be set back and finished sufficiently to distinguish it as new work separate from the existing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brand. So just to be clear, that is Councillor Brand has moved that as an amendment to this motion. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second.
Councillor Gross. Councillor Brand, would you, Councillor Copsey, would you like to ask a clarifying question? Yeah, go for it.
I wanted to ask the officers whether the amended condition is, in their view, enforceable, and whether there is any inconsistency with the other conditions that have been put in their recommendation.
Mrs. D'Alessandro. Just one more time, hit the button. Got it.
Sorry.
Through you, Mr Chair, no, it doesn't conflict any other proposed conditions before us. Is it enforceable? It will become conditions on the permit. It will mean that there will be a design change for that east elevation, and it also may mean that that level that it's referring to, there might be an internal alteration to that apartment.
Can I add to Mr Alessandro's comment?
Sure, Mr Borg.
Mr Chairman, also the applicant doesn't have to accept that condition and can contest that condition at Becker.
Councillor Crawford, did you have a question?
I wanted to clarify, given the ruling by the tribunal already, or the previous conference, are they likely to accept this? Like, is it something that then you will, if we pass this amendment, will you have to fight for it, or you will be able to choose not to apply that condition when you are in the hearing?
Ms Pound?
Thank you, through you, Mr Chair. If you vote to include the condition, then yes, we will argue that condition at the tribunal. In terms of this design element, it wasn't part of the previous design because previously they were demolishing that whole eastern wall. So therefore, the tribunal hasn't turned its mind to this issue, so we can certainly put forward an argument that they haven't already considered. It wouldn't be a repeat question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Pound. Councillor Gross, clarifying question from you. Your microphone's not on, Councillor.
I wanted to ask Councillor Brown, why didn't you put in there just preserve that side wall? Why do you want it? Why do you want to do borough charter it and make it a preserve the height element, but make it distinguishable from the rest of the old building?
I'll allow it if you go quickly.
Look, I think we're spending too much time on it, but my fault. I'm just saying preserve the wall, but if it as is, but it could be rebuilt to appear to be the same. It's partly to do with preserving the shape of the old building as well as the actual fabric of it. If they can't use the fabric, they at least need to preserve the shape of it so that we can read what was old and what wasn't. Not absolutely essential, but if we're going to do it, we should do it correctly.
Any further clarifying questions? Okay, we're considering the amendment here. It's been moved by Councillor Brand and seconded by Councillor Gross. No one's currently spoken to the amendment. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to your amendment?
I'm sorry it was so much time spent on it, but it's important, I think, to get these things right.
Thanks, Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion? Speak to the amendment, pardon me. No problem. Anyone else like to speak to the amendment? I'll put that amendment to you. All those in favour? All those against? Motion is carried. Amendment is carried. That now forms part of the substantive motion, which has been moved by Councillor Bond and Councillor Copsey. Anyone else still wishing to speak to the substantive? No? Okay. Councillor Bond, would you like to summarise? All right, I'll put that motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried. Great. Thank you for everybody that has come in this evening to speak, and thank you for your patience as we deliberated the agenda item. We appreciate you staying around. Councillors, we'll now move to item 6.5, which is Gladstone Street, South Melbourne. Only one speaker has requested, and that is the applicant or their representative. I call Mr. Ian Kidston. Welcome. Just get you to hit the button. Name and suburb.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Ian Kidston. I'm from Port Melbourne.
Go ahead. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to congratulate Council and the officers for this particular matter. It's been a very collegiate approach, and it's one that's, I think, come with a very sound outcome. I commend the officers' report to Council. It's a report which is based very firmly in the planning scheme and delivers a good outcome consistent with all the relevant planning policies. I don't think there's anything else I need to add to it, and I just thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any officers' questions? Councillor Voss, go ahead. Oh, Mr. Kidson, sorry, would you approach the chair again? Councillor Voss would just like to ask you a question. That's fine. Go ahead, Councillor Voss.
Hello, Mr. Kidston. I just wanted to know, this is the second application for this particular site.
As I understand it, I was not involved in the first one.
No. Do you know why there's two applications, of why that might be?
My understanding is the first application, the developer went broke, was the colloquial way of saying it, and my client, who, David and Annie, I've known for 20 years, I've lived in the area for 22 years. They're currently in Albert Street and previously that in Ross Street. This is their long-term house. It's not a development as such, it's just somewhere where they can build a very large house within the capital city zone. So they have a strong preference for going forward with this. The current plans, as I understand, are still active for the previous one, but they don't really want to act on this. They want to build their family home.
Thank you.
Any further questions of the officers? Thanks. Feel free to take a seat. Councillors, you've got an officer's recommendation in front of you. Councillor Crawford. You're welcome to move it. Okay. Councillor Crawford moves the officer's recommendation and Councillor Copsey seconds the motion. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak? Okay. We'll put that motion to you. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried unanimously. Move now to item 6.6, planning permits and delegation reports. Any questions on this report, councillors, for officers? There being none, Councillor Gross, thank you for moving, and Councillor Copsey, thank you for seconding. Anyone wish to speak to the motion? No, I'll put that motion to you, councillors. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. I'll move now to item number... sorry, did I get it wrong? Do you want to call a division? You still can. I haven't moved. We're still on the item. I'll call a division. Division called. All those in favour? Councillor Copsey, Bond, Brand, Voss, Pearl, Baxter, Crawford, Gross and Simic. I called one. Move now to item 7, urgent business. Any items? Pearl, I did, yeah. Any items of urgent business? No. Okay, move now to item 8, confidential matters. There are no confidential matters on the agenda. There's no further items of business. Councillors, thank you for your patience this evening, and I declare this meeting closed.